Hi, I'm Tom Biebighauser, owner of Wetland Restoration and Training. We are continuing to design this wetland project, and today we're going to be digging a test hole. The test hole is going to show us the technique to use to build this wetland area. And the test hole is one of the most important parts of wetland design. Many people I've met, professionals that I've met, they believe that you can design a wetland in the office. They think that you can run all these runoff coefficients, that you can look at soil texture on NRCS maps, and that you can work things up in AutoCAD and produce a design for a wetland that will work. I have found the opposite to be true. You need to be on the ground, sampling soils, looking at texture by layer, looking at the slope, looking at the presence of a basin, and then trying to figure out how to disable drainage structures. So let's go through the different steps here in designing a wetland, and this is the most important. Let's dig this test hole. When designing a wetland, it's important to know what soil textures are present. The three main soil textures in the world are sand, silt, and clay. When building a wetland, we really want to see if there's clay present, because that can be compacted to hold water and give us the hydro period in the wetland. Now, in looking at soil textures, the coarsest particles are found in sand. The finest particles are in clay. We're going to do some testing here and show you that you don't have to be a soil scientist to identify clay, and you don't have to be a soil scientist to know all the intricacies of soil texturing. Well, let's get started. Let's try this soil sample right here. I'm going to pick up a sample of this soil about the size of a walnut or golf ball, and I'm going to add some water. I have this handy spray bottle here, but you can use a water bottle. And I'm going to add some water and then mix that water in to the soil sample. And we're going to use what's called the ribbon test. We're going to see if we could form a long and a thin ribbon from the soil that has the right moisture content. So I've worked that water into the soil sample now, and now I'm going to push it and compress it and compact it between my thumb and my finger. And in doing that, it just crumbles. I'm not able to make any ribbon at all, not even a centimeter long. Look at that. It's just, don't use this in building a wetland area. Silt is the most difficult soil texture for people to identify, but yet it's a very common soil texture throughout North America and the world. Silt has the consistency of flour, and you remember what it's like to add water to flour. So let's try a sample of silt. I'm going to take a chunk of silt about the size of a walnut and place it in the palm of my hand. And then I have my water spray bottle here, and I'm going to add some water and mix it in. And I see that there's dust and powder. That's typical of silt. The soil sample feels very sticky. Silt is sticky, and silt is very soft. And it's very easy to work in the water, but silt crumbles. It's very difficult to compact. The ribbon test is a test where you're trying to compact the soil and see if it holds together in a long and a thin ribbon. So now I've worked in almost enough water, and I'm trying to dry the sample a little bit. If you try to make a ribbon when it's too wet, it'll just be like liquid. So now I have about the right consistency of water, and I can see that it's breaking. The soil sample broke on me. That's typical of silt. And now I have the perfect consistency of water in here, and I'm going to push it between my thumb and my finger. And notice how it sticks to my thumb, and it won't allow me to make a ribbon. Oh, there's a little ribbon. Oh, it's about a ½ inch long. Let's try to make another ribbon out of the same sample. Again, I'm pushing it as hard as I can between my thumb and my forefinger, and it is just breaking off. Look at how it broke off in these little tiny pieces. Let's measure those. Let's see how long those are. I'm going to grab the ruler here. Okay, here we have the ruler, and if we measure that length of that ribbon, it's about 2.5 centimeters. This one here is about 1 centimeter. And let's try it in inches. This one's 3/4 of an inch, and this one is about a ½ inch. It's very difficult to build a wetland using silt texture soil. Why? You're not able to compact it. It's highly erodible. During construction, if there's a rain, you'll have deep gullies forming, and you're just not able to shape it, and it won't stay together. And it has all these deep cracks in it, so I don't recommend building a wetland out of silt soil. Now it's time to look at clay. Clay is what we use to build the majority of wetlands. Learning how to identify clay texture is really helpful, and it can save you a lot of money paying people to analyze soil samples. I'm going to pick up a couple chunks of clay here, and right away that's an indication that clay is present because it is in these big chunks when it's dry. So I'm going to add some water. One needs to be patient when adding water to clay and mixing it. Clay will crumble, it'll break, you'll think it's a rock. It just takes time to soak in. It is so important to determine soil texture in the test hole that you dig. Failure to do this can result in significant embarrassment when the wetland you build fails to hold water as planned. I have seen $500,000 wetland projects fail because the people designing it didn't dig test holes and didn't want to get their hands dirty. When I first started building wetlands, my success rate was about 50%. Over the years, I've been able to figure out how to recontour an area so that it will look and function like a natural wetland. And the lowest cost way of doing this, and the most effective way, is to find a site that has clay, disable the drainage structures, and then reshape it. I'm continuing to mix the water thoroughly, and I'm not feeling any hard, dry spots. The next thing I'm going to do is to remove a little bit of the soil. I have a little bit too much here. And then I can start pushing it between my thumb and my finger. The ribbon test is all about compaction. If the soil sample has enough clay, you can compact it to form a long and thin ribbon. And if you see here, I'm going vertical with the ribbon. And when it breaks off, we're going to measure it. Now, you don't want a thick ribbon. You want to make a thin ribbon, and when it breaks off, we're going to measure it, and I'm going to catch it in my hand before it hits the ground. And I see it starting to crack, and there I caught it. Now we're going to measure and see how long the ribbon is. We'll start off with imperial. We have a ribbon that is 3 3/4 inches long, or 9.5 centimeters long. So the rule is, if you can ribbon more than 2.5 inches, or at least 5 centimeters, there's enough clay to build a wetland out of it. And we can use what's called the surface water technique, or we can use the compacted clay liner technique. We're going to measure the clay content in bentonite. Bentonite is rock that is mined and it's pulverized, and many people believe that it can be used to seal the water in a leaky pond or a leaky wetland area. Let's find out how much clay is in bentonite. So here's a sample of bentonite that I purchased from a feed store. I'm going to take a chunk of bentonite about the size of a walnut, and we're going to add some water to it. Okay, so I'm starting to mix in a little bit of water. And generally when you are going for a ribbon sample, you add too much water and then you have to wait for it to evaporate. So it's taken a while for this water to work in. I have worked with people who have used bentonite in an attempt to seal leaky ponds in many parts of North America. Just about every state and every province, people have been using bentonite to fix leaks in ponds. Now, I started using bentonite in 1979 and 1980 because the wetlands I built weren't holding water, so I spent a lot of money on bentonite. I've never had a success using bentonite. I've met people that have spent $30,000 or $40,000 on semi-truckloads of bentonite, applying it to their leaky ponds with no success. So now that I've worked the water in, I'm going to roll the sample and make this tube. All right, now that it's in a roll here, or tube, I'm going to push on the tip as hard as I can. And I'm going to see what I can do with the ribbon. Uh-oh. Well, that's a ribbon. That broke off. I'm going to lay that down and we'll measure that in a minute. Let's keep on doing this. I'm going to go back to making this a tube. Really, really work on this, okay? Now, I'm going to start pushing on the tip of it. Pushing on the tip as hard as I can. Feel slimy. Uh-oh, that just broke off. There's another ribbon. That's not very long. Let's measure that one. Okay, I'm going to measure that ribbon that just broke off, and I'm going to find that it is 1 inch long. Bentonite is not soil. If we're going to treat it like soil, then we're going to do the ribbon test and see how long the ribbon is that we can make before it breaks off. Our test showed that this has enough clay to form a ribbon that is 1 inch long, or 2.5 centimeters, before it breaks off. That is not enough clay to build a wetland area. After you've marked the perimeter of the wetland that you would like to build, go towards the center, and that's the place to dig your test hole. If you're working on a wetland that is smaller than 1/3 of an acre, 1 test hole in the center should be adequate. If you're working on wetlands that are over 1/3 of an acre, I recommend several test holes, and larger projects we dig as many as 20 test holes. There are many tools that we can use to dig a test hole. I'm going to show you the first one, the shovel. Yes, shovels work quite well if you don't have any of this other equipment. Here's another tool that you can use to dig a test hole. It's a post hole digger. These are commonly available in home improvement stores and hardware stores, and they work quite well, but it's difficult to dig a hole any deeper than 1 meter or 3 feet. This is my favorite tool for digging a test hole on a wetland project. It's called an open face clay auger. And in looking at the auger part, one sees that there are no bars or ribs here. That makes it so much easier to remove the clay when you're digging. This tool is 52 inches long. I have another soil auger with extensions so we can go even deeper. This is called a tile probe. It's a rod. It's smooth, about 4 feet long, and it's used to find clay drain tile in the ground. Now, I use it as a quick test for groundwater and the presence of rock. It is not a tool to use in determining soil texture. I carry one of these with me everywhere I go when designing a wetland project. And we're going to do a quick test for groundwater on this site where we're designing a wetland. I'm going to put this probe in the ground, start working it in, and I can feel some rock at the very bottom. There, I'm hitting rock. I'm going to work it up and down. Now, I don't know what soil texture it is, but I know that there's rock about 3.5 feet below the surface. Now I'm going to bring it up, and if water is on the tip of this, then I know there's groundwater. So the very tip of this is wet. I can feel water. And what that shows me is that water is soaking into the ground, and when it reaches the rock layer 3.5 feet down, it's pooling on that rock layer. And that's really important to know when it comes to designing a wetland and knowing what technique to use. You're looking at an 8-foot long tile probe. Really helpful in determining if there's rock below the surface and groundwater within 8 feet of the surface. It's very quick using one of these. When you purchase one of these, make sure they're the small diameter, not the large diameter. Large diameter, you won't be able to push it into the ground. Small diameter works best. People say, well, I'll bend it. No, you won't bend one of these. They're so strong. I'll show you how this is used. First of all, we push in the 4-foot auger as a pilot hole, but I'm going to shortcut it here. And I'm going to go with this 8-foot long probe. Very helpful tool. They come in all different lengths. I recommend purchasing a 4-foot one and an 8-foot one. And I'm still going down with it, but we know at about 3.5 feet I'll hit rock. I feel that I'm hitting rock with the tile probe and it's grabbing it. That indicates that there's some gravel on top of the bedrock. Okay, that's about it. Now I'm going to bring it up and check for the presence of water. You're looking for water just like oil adheres to a dipstick. Whoa! There's water all the way from the tip back to here. There's quite a bit of groundwater on this site. Fascinating. I'm going to use the 2.5-inch diameter open face clay auger with a 52-inch long handle to dig a test hole on this wetland that we're designing. We've gone to the center of the wetland that we've marked on the ground using wire flags. And now I'm going to stick this in and start turning it. The auger is about 8 inches long. I don't want to fill it completely. Bring it straight up. And what I look for is topsoil near the surface, switching to mineral soil. And I have a tape measure here. Topsoil has a lot of organics in it. It's where the field has been plowed year after year. And it's darker in color. And there are fine roots in the topsoil. Why do we need to know where the topsoil is? It's because when it comes to building the wetland, we like to save the topsoil and respread it in the basin. And then also, we're not able to build what's called a groundwater dam out of topsoil because topsoil has too many organics and it won't compact. So looking at this, we have 3 inches of topsoil on this site. I can see a color change where the mineral soil is a light brown and the topsoil is almost black. I can see the roots in it. So we're looking at 3 inches of topsoil and then we're going into mineral soil. So what I'm going to record on my data sheet is 3 inches of topsoil. I'm going to do that right now and write topsoil. I'm going to push it out of the auger and I'm going to try to line it up here so we get what's called a soil profile. It's hard to do. You have to push it from the sides here. So we have gone down about 8 inches. Now it's time to go down another auger length. Bring it up. Light colored. I can see some black specks in here. That's probably manganese. That indicates that this soil is seasonally wet, which makes sense because the soil sample feels quite damp. We're going to texture this now, but first of all, I'm going to remove part of it. Now I'm going to pick up a piece about the size of a walnut, and I'm going to add some water. It's quite damp now. I don't have to add much water. We're going to find out if there's any clay in here. So I've added too much water, which is what happens. I need to mix it into the sample to get the right consistency. That is a long and thin ribbon that's being supported by its own weight. That indicates high clay content. Let's measure it and see. Here we have our tape measure. 4.5-inch long ribbon. That brings it into the clay category. So yes, we have clay at this depth. Now, I'm going to measure what depth I took the sample using the ruler here, the tape measure. So at 16 inches below the surface, there's clay. Let's go deeper with the hole. Bring up the soil in increments as long as your auger. You don't want to compact it in your auger. It'll be very difficult to remove. I'm looking for any obvious change in color and in texture, and it's looking the same. So what we're going to do is remove part of this sample and then use the ribbon test on what's at the very end of the auger. Now, in removing this soil from the auger, I can see orange areas. These orange areas are what we call redox features. It's where the roots have gone down deep and carried oxygen, and the soil has oxidized. The iron is oxidized. Basically, the iron in the soil has rusted, and that shows me that this soil is wet during a good part of the year below the surface here. The soil sample feels cold and damp. I won't have to add much water. Adding too much water, we'll have to wait for it to dry. So at this depth, we're picking up what I would call hydric soil because of the modeling, and it has some gray color to it. That's a really good sign when it comes to building a wetland that your soils are damp. Okay, now that I have added the water to the sample, I'm going to make a tube. And now it's time to ribbon. The goal is not to make a long, thin ribbon, but to see how long the ribbon is that breaks off. There's a difference there. And there it just broke off. Time to measure it. This ribbon is 4 inches long, and I'm going to get a depth on it. 23 inches below the surface, we're able to make a ribbon 4 inches long. It is still clay. Let's go deeper with our soil auger. I can hear water in the hole, the slurping sound. Look at how wet it is. There's water on the side of the auger. Water is dripping. You can just see how much water is in the soil sample. This is saturated at this depth. The soil test hole will reveal soil texture by layer, and it'll also reveal if there's groundwater present at the time of year you're digging the hole. We have entered into the groundwater. I'm not going to measure it until we finish digging the hole. The color of the soil is brown, but it does have gray tones to it, and it has these mottling or rust spots from the roots bringing in oxygen. So there is enough moisture in this soil where I barely have to add any to make a ribbon. But we're going to test it at this depth. I'm going to add a little bit of water and then mix it in. If there's a sand layer, a gravel layer, we want to find it now and be able to bring in the heavy equipment that can handle it. All right, I've worked in the water. See how quick that is? If we're dealing with dry clay, it would take a long time to work in the water. When we're looking and working with saturated clay, it doesn't take much water at all to get it to the consistency to make a ribbon. Now we have the tube. Look at how it's staying together. And I can start, it's a little bit too wet. It feels really smooth. It's staying together nicely. Long, thin ribbon. Time to measure it. 8-inch long ribbon. Clay category. This is high in clay. We made an 8-inch long ribbon showing us it's clay. Dig deeper. I can hear the water in the hole. I'm feeling some rock or gravel. I'm not sure how much deeper I can go. The soil is almost falling out of the auger. It is so wet. I'm going to go ahead. Same color, same consistency, saturated. I'm going to go down a little bit deeper, see if I can get through that rocky layer. I've hit resistance. That is the bottom of the test hole right there. And I'm bringing up soil, no gravel in the auger. Oh, no, there, wait a minute. There's a few pieces of gravel. In the very bottom of the test hole, I'm feeling gravel. Small rocks, like what you'd gravel a driveway with. Here's a little bit larger rock right here. But the groundwater is resting on top of the rock, which is a very good sign. That indicates that the water is not soaking any deeper into the ground. What the water is doing is following that thin gravel layer all the way to the stream by resting on top of that bedrock. The end of the auger hit gravel, and I'm not able to go past the gravel using the tools that I have. So now it's time to measure the bottom of the test hole where I encountered rock. The test hole is 34 inches deep. 34 inches, and I believe that is down to bedrock because of the water coming into the hole. So write it down. Test hole 34 inches deep. Take your time in measuring the elevation of water in the test hole. Let it take time to rise to the surface. We've been waiting here a fair time, so now I'm going to measure how far below the surface the groundwater has come into the hole. I can see the groundwater in the hole, and I can see the end of the tape measure. The water has risen in the hole to 1 foot below the surface, 12 inches or 30 centimeters below the surface. And I don't think it's going to rise anymore. If it were to come closer to the surface, then the grasses in this field would disappear and be replaced by bulrushes and sedges. This is the end of winter, first part of spring. It's when the elevation of groundwater is at the highest. So if we're looking to build a wetland that would be supplied primarily with groundwater, it's best to do this measuring in the fall when the elevation of groundwater will be lowest. However, the soil at this location contains the mottling and the gray colors, and that shows us that it is moist all year. I was able to dig 34 inches deep using the open face clay auger, and when I brought up the clay auger at that depth, I found gravels in the very end of the clay auger. So that means I'm encountering a gravel layer and I'm not able to get through it with the auger. So now it's time to use the tile probe and find out if I can push the tile probe in between the gravels and reach bedrock. So we know that when the tile probe hits rock, it's 34 inches deep. So I'm going to try to get past that gravel. Okay, that's bedrock right there. Now it's time to measure. So I grab the surface and the rod, bring it up. Then I use the tape measure to measure from my hand to the end of the auger. To the end of the tile probe. Tile probe is dripping wet. And it's at 4 feet. So it matches the shorter tile probe that we used. So 4 foot below the surface is bedrock, and that the water is perched on top of that. So this is a really good site to build a wetland. The test hole we dug today indicates that this is an excellent place to build a wetland. What we found was 3 inches of topsoil, and then we had clay going down 34 inches. We encountered a gravel layer, but the gravel is on top of bedrock. The bedrock is not permeable. How we know this? There's groundwater perched on top of the bedrock, and water entered our test hole and came to within 12 inches of the surface. We could build this wetland using the surface water technique. My name is Tom Biebighauser. This is Wetland Restoration and Training. Thank you for joining us. Please share this video with others, like it, and subscribe, and visit the website for Wetland Restoration and Training, where you'll find all sorts of good resources that will help you to design and build a wetland area.